Hello, welcome to Automation Hour. I'm Jennifer Lee, the co-host. I'm here along with David Litton and Rakesh Gupta, who are also my co-hosts, and our guest presenter today, Joey Lynn. So for those of you joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. Please use the chat function to ask questions regarding to Joey's presentation, or if you have process automation journal questions, you can ask that as well. And if we do not get to all your questions today, post them to our Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour, and we will continue the discussion there. We will post the recording sometime after the session when we get our website up and running. We're having technical difficulties, but at some point Automation Hour will be back up and running, so stay tuned for that. And we're really excited for our upcoming sessions. I see that Amanda, who is our next presenter, is on as well. Hi, Amanda. So we're looking forward to that. We have some really great presenters, several MVPs as well. So when we post the link to the deck, we've also communicated on Twitter as well as the Trailblazer community, the links to register for those sessions. And even if you can't attend, I would recommend registering for them anyways, because you'll get the email with the link to the deck and the recording afterwards. And once our site is back up and running, if you're interested in presenting, you could submit your idea, and then we will be in contact with you to get you scheduled in. All right. And a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io, for sponsoring this free webinar series that we could come and present to the Salesforce community. And here are your co-hosts, David, myself, and Rakesh. And if there are people out there who are going to Southeast Streaming and you have on your goal to learn Flow, I recommend coming to my session, Flow It, Automate Processes with Clicks, Not Code. And with that, I am going to hand this off to our guest presenter, Joey Lynn.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. First off, I wanted to say thank you to Jennifer and to David and to Rakesh for having me here today, your time with us today. Because I myself am a webinar junkie. I listen to them. I attend live. I listen to the recordings. Any way I can work them into my schedule, I take advantage of that. And Automation Hour has been a staple for me. So when I'm participating, one of my goals, or my main goal, is one nugget, one aha moment, one thing I can add to my org, a business process, or even just my daily routine. If I can glean that one thing, I feel like it's worth the investment. So now you can reach out to me, and I hope I can provide for you the same type of things. One thing you can take home to put in your toolbox. Now, later you can reach out to me through one of the social channels. We could create a new process builder together. We may become lifelong friends and go conquer the world. And that's super cool too. But if I can just give you that one nugget to take home, that would make me very excited. So let me get back to the deck so I can see it on my screen. All right, Jen, if you would go to the next slide, please. So today I wanted to flip the script a little bit here, and we are going to talk about the nuts and bolts of, how to build these things. But I also wanted to speak to the why, sort of, because in my opinion, now once again, this is just me here, but your title may be Salesforce admin, it may be junior admin, it may be developer, but when you get into these types of arenas, you're really a business analyst, and you have to think like a business analyst to provide the proper tools for your end users. So what we're talking about today is simplifying the sales process and what I consider wiping out the gray areas. Okay, Jen, next slide, please. So before we get too deep in, I thought it would be so we could flavor sort of why we did the things we did and the decisions we made. It would be best if you knew a little bit about Innovate Medical and a little bit more about me. So Innovate Medical, we manufacture fixed and mobile workstations for electronic data capture. So think about doctors and nurses going room to room charting. Okay, so they have to capture that data to input into the EMR. So we We provide power systems and batteries to enable increased workflow and continuous mobility. And then we do asset management software so we can have remote visibility of all our devices that live around the world. We focus primarily in the clinical space. We have active equipment in more than 60% of all U.S. hospitals. Tenet, HCA, and the VA are big customers. But we also provide devices to manufacturing and logistics companies, kind of like Amazon, Eli Lilly, and if you're in Texas, HEB Grocery is a big customer. And so we provide installation, service, and support through sort of a consultative approach. And our end goal is obviously to help our customers increase productivity and achieve better outcomes. So next slide. So who am I? I started with Innovate in May of 2009 as an inside sales rep. I've got a background in sales and marketing. I've always landed in that role. And it fit okay, but I love the interactions. I just hate closing. And it always was bad for me. And so fast forward or go back to your school days, and you always took these aptitude tests. And there were always two professions that came up that I would be suited for: a surgeon and an automobile mechanic. And for years, 25, 30 years, and it was always there. It was like luggage. I just carried it around with me. I always was questioning, how did these two relate? And you on the phone have probably already figured it out. It took me forever, but I was in one of those introspective places, and I finally realized my personality is, give me a problem, let me go fix it, let me move on to the next one. And that's why I love Process Builder and Flow so much, because you can set things in place, you can create standardized, consistent, replicable results every time someone loops through their Process Builder or their Flow. So I am an unashamed Salesforce enthusiast. I drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago. I started out, as I said, as an inside sales rep. That position, through a series of acquisitions, was eliminated. I was moved to the role of accidental/solo admin. And now, as of a couple of weeks ago, I am managing our CRM as well as our account management department. So hopefully within the next few weeks, couple months, I will have a junior admin in to take some of that lift off of me. So I'm very excited about that. But okay, Jen, next slide. But what I want to talk to you today is, it was sort of a big picture thing. What was our solve? What was our problem? And we had a huge problem in our sales and quoting process. It was managed by an Excel spreadsheet tool. There were dozens of different iterations. They all lived on somebody's inbox or Dropbox. They had wildly varying prices. Prices would get updated on one and not on the other. They had product codes that were either incorrect or obsolete, so we were always getting quotes in with bad values on them. We had no document control. And coming from my perspective, we also had no brand control. Much like when you go to a chain restaurant, they want to provide a consistent experience. They want the food to taste the same. They want the service to be exactly the same. They want everything to be exactly the same. And that's what we were trying to drive by building these processes inside Salesforce against quoting and our sales and quoting to drive that consistent experience. We want to own that customer experience, because in today's world, 70% or more of a purchase decision is made before a buyer ever picks up the phone. Okay, so this shortens the time that you've got to spend with the prospect, and every step has to be consistent and repeatable. Now, before we go into the business case, I want to say we are still on Classic. So everything you're going to see today is in the Classic form, but 18 is our year of sales. We're going to evaluate every tool we have. We're going to clean and refresh and roll out Lightning through a staged deployment. And going through a lot of the trailheads of late, Salesforce never really came out and said it, but I think if push came to shove, they would say that they would prefer sort of a staged rollout. They seem to implicitly indicate that through the trailheads I did. So we're gonna roll out to internal, and then our inside sales reps that are remote, and then to our whole sales team. So we got the plan in place. So now I want to talk about some of the things that we do in the background. So okay, go ahead, Jennifer. So all of this started, and just let me tell you, this is the first flow I ever built, so please be kind. There you will probably see things that may not be as elegant as they could be. And I will say there have been many flows built since this that are built with better architecture, that are more streamlined. But this was the first one I ever built, and so please be kind. But we had this one little innocuous button, and it's not a big deal to the sales reps, but it did a whole lot of stuff in the background. It's a Visualforce button, and it will be impacted by our migration to Lightning. Okay, so we'll have to, and it will likely become a Lightning component, but I have no concern about the migration. I'm really excited about the build. But so what we want to do is this is to automate the process of building a quote or an opportunity, the products underneath it. So next slide. So this is, and once again, I just wanted to touch on this in case anyone wasn't familiar with what lives behind that button or on a small Visualforce page like this. And most of you are probably looking at this and saying, yeah, I could write that before breakfast in the morning. But if anyone had questions, pretty simple stuff. Grabs the standard controller for the opportunity object. We tell it the interview name, which is the flow that we want it to go out and grab, which is called configuration tool 2. And then once it finishes doing everything, below it are the parameters, the Apex parameters that we're going to drop in. It's going to be the field and the value we want to translate over. And then the finish location is when you get done, take me back to the opportunity ID in question. So basically that's what that Visualforce page is there behind that button. Now, Jen, could you transition it back to me as the presenter? Because I'm going to actually walk through what this flow looks like. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. Jen, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay. So this one little button here says configure product. So if we click on configure product, now we have reps that had come in from acquisitions from different companies. So we had, people that were expert on one side of the fence, people that were expert on the other side of the fence. We had all these different moving parts. And so some people can configure one set of products, some people configure the other. We needed a tool so that they were comfortable going in and configuring anything. Okay. And so what we did was we provided them with mobile workstations with the drop down list. Is it a mobile workstation? Is it a wall station? ARM? You could do just batteries. Like I said, we provide power systems and batteries, or you could do just drawers. That's not a common sale, but it comes up. So we built it in. So as I mentioned, this is the year of sales. So we're going to be overhauling all of this, but I'm going to walk you through what this looks like. It's still active and used today. But there are things that even going through this presentation, there are things I noticed I can do that better. Or when we reissue this is what I want to pivot into. So anyway, so we're going to do 10 units. All right. And the projected close date, that was one of those parameters that we pulled over. Okay. The discount level, that actually comes from the account record. So if the facility in question has a standard discounting parameter, which you can change, once again, this is a text field or a text box. So you can put a different value in there if you'd like, and it will render that back onto your opportunity, or it will carry this value, which is assigned to a variable. Once again, we start talking about the process of making things easier. I can't tell you the number of times that we've had trucks show up at a facility where there wasn't a loading dock. So we asked the question, will the facility accept a 53-foot truck? If not, we're going to need a lift gate, or we're going to need a smaller truck. Is there an appointment required? Is there a lift gate required? All these things that we weren't getting answers to. So we showed up on site, and all of a sudden we got an upset customer because we didn't do what they asked us to do. And number two, now we're going back to the depot, and we'll go back the next day, costing us time and money. So, big question, powered or non-powered? Non-powered devices are pretty standard, so we're going to go with a powered, okay? So we're just walking them through the progression of getting them comfortable, of building these devices. So now I'm going to speak to this later, but these images, I thought these were really cool. Um, and the reason being because we had what this is called our EMC device. We have what's called the Sidekick, and we have what's called the Slimline. Some people are very familiar with the EMC. Some people very familiar with the others. Some people not so familiar with our Mobius Power. All these different pieces that if we left them to their own devices to create these records, then there could be things overlooked and or things that were just wrong. And so, we put in notes in the fields. Mobius includes 2 cables and 2 tips. It's just a reminder. These are the things it's coming with. If you need anything else, you got to order them. Batteries and charging stations and additional cables are sold separately, and we'll get into that flow in a minute. So what we're going to do, for ease, we're going to do an EMC quad Mobius. That means it has 4 power outlets. And then will you be quoting batteries? Now, this is actually a separate flow in and of itself. We'll get into the architecture behind that in a minute as well. So yeah, we're going to quote some batteries. Now, if they don't know anything about how to quote these, so it says you've selected 10 EMC quad devices. Normally we quote 2 batteries per device. So giving them the layout, if they didn't know that, then they might quote it wrong. We quote 2 batteries and 1 charging bay position per device. And I won't get into all the mechanics of that, but that's our standard protocol. So below, we put in the suggested quantity, okay? But they can change that. What type of battery? Is it a 2-cycle or a 1-cycle? That's a 2-year or a 4-year battery. So we're going to go with the 4-year battery. For ease of math, we're going to do 1 2-bay charger, and we're going to do 2 4-bay chargers. So they got 10 charging bays. So validation screens are my friend. I always build in validation screens behind the flows. Number one, when I'm building, it gives me something to visually verify that it's going the way that I anticipate it's going to go. But it also gives the user, this is what you tell me you want. You want 20 batteries. You want this mobile device. Here's the price. You want the charging or one 2-bay charger and 2 4-bay chargers. Just to verify, this is what you want. So the reason it's lagging there a little bit is because it's finishing that flow and then it's jumping back into the main flow. So if we actually went out and looked on this opportunity, the batteries and the chargers will already be there. So once again, we were talking about, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit later, what you call constants. And everybody waxes poetic about, the sales object variables and fast updates and stuff. But these, to me, were very important because I was able to provide my end users with a visual reference. If they had a question about any of these designs that we did, it was right there in front of them. They had to pick up the phone and call anybody. They knew exactly what they're ordering for their customers. As a matter of fact, this translates very well to a phone. It's a little small, or an iPad that you could actually do this in front of a customer. Okay, so we've got 2 flavors: a laptop or a flat panel monitor. We're going to do with the flat panel monitor side battery mount. Now, once again, all the things that go into configuring this device. Do you want a power actuator? It's powered. It will be a power actuator. Just the note, 5-tier EMC drawers require an extended column actuator. So if we're going with a big time med application, we're going to need that extended column. We're not doing that today, so we're going to keep rolling. Standard or extra large tray top and handle, we're going to go with standard. Once again, another validation screen. I'm a big proponent of validation screens. This gives them the product code, the description of the device, and the pricing. You click next. Here's another flow that came up. Would you like to configure drawers? In this instance, we're not, for sake of time. And back to our opportunity we go. And if you scroll down, there are our 20 batteries, our 2-bay charger, our 4-bay charger, our 10 mobile devices with the discount percentage that we put forth for them, all built right into our opportunity. Sales rep didn't have to know that much about what he was quoting. So if he was quoting something he wasn't familiar with, the system guided him or her through that process. And that's really the what I love about Process Builder and Flow is it takes the gray areas out. You don't have to know everything that happens around every record you deal with. It's only the pieces that are pertinent to you. One thing that one of my mantras for this year is question everything. Just because a user says they want something or need something, that doesn't necessarily mean they want it or need it. I always go back to my story about the ham. I know what everybody knows what a real ham, not deli ham, not spam, but a real ham. It's got the shank, it's got the bone end of it. Well, there was this lady, and I don't remember who I spoke to, but I heard this story firsthand. Every year when she cooked the ham, she would cut a couple inches. She had her hacksaw, and she'd cut a couple inches off of the end of the ham. Until finally one year, she finally decided to question the convention. And she said her mother, she called her mother, she said, Mama, and that's what we call our mothers in the South. She said, Mama, why do you cut the end off that ham? And she said, well, because my hams never fit in my pan growing up. Question everything. Just because we've done it today doesn't mean we need to do it tomorrow. And that's sort of where I try to put on my business analyst hat, making sure that the processes and the procedures that we're putting in place for our customers slash end users are the best that we can provide. Because the better we can make them perform, the better the entire business is going to perform. My idea is the less they see me, the happier I am, because that means my processes are working properly. Okay, so now Jen, if you could go back to the deck for me. And there we go. Okay, so we're on. And next. So this is just sort of a reiteration of the screen you just saw. Okay, this is just the UI for one of the screens you just saw, talking about the mobile devices, the notes that we put in behind them. Just wanted to reiterate that so that so now we're going to kind of look behind the curtains, as it were, as to the screen that actually programs the UI. So if you go to the next screen, and you couldn't see me do the air quotes, but I use programs in air quotes. I hate to drop names, but my friend Doug Ayers, I always tell him about how badly I want to code. I want to build that skill set. And he always says, you're so close. When you're building flows in Process Builder, you're so close. It's just, you're right there. And I do understand that. There's very few things that you can't do with Process Builder and flows that require coding. Now, obviously, there are things. You can't delete records, being one thing, and there are other things you can't do. But for what I build on a daily basis for my customers, this works, or my end users, this works great. So the reason that line there is in blue, the EMC pick line, is, as I mentioned earlier, people wax poetic about variables and quick updates and all those things. There's tons of resources on the internet. I was trying to get pictures into my flow, and I had to learn about constants. So I was trying to do something today that didn't get as much pub out there on the internet. So anyway, Jen, next screen. Okay, so back into our flow builder. All right. So you would go to the resources tab. All right, under your tools available, and you would double click on the constant, and that's going to start you down the path. Now, before you go there, the one thing I wanted to touch on is to make it sort of a dynamic thing. Now, you have to build them for every flow you do, but if you build the pictures into the flow for every flow you do, then you got to put that picture into every flow, and that's just, to me, a lot of data with little return. So to create constants, to make them work the way that I got these to work on my flow, I use what are called static resources. Okay, so if you would, Jen, if you would click on static, the next, yep. So simply go into the setup window, search static. There's your static resources. So you would, double click there. It's going to take you into the list of static resources. And then there's a little button at the top which says new. Okay, so a couple of things that I always stumbled over. One being the name can have no spaces or dashes. Okay, so if you put your name in there and you choose a file and it breaks and you got to change it, you're going to have to go back and choose the file again. Not the end of the world. It's just additional button clicks. And I always make mine public. Okay, and the reason I do that is because, well, Jen, go to the next slide. And this sort of defines the difference between private and public, and it's really about the caching. Okay, so the second line there, the static resource is only stored in cache for the current user session. So that's the important piece out of this verbiage. Now, for what I was doing in my flow, it worked fine. There was no reason that it needed to be public, and that doesn't mean that it's accessible out on the internet. That just means it can be pushed around through different flows and access to. So I've never built anything to that level, but it was just easiest to go ahead and make them public in the beginning, and that way, if I needed that type of functionality, it was available to me. One thing I didn't touch on the screen before, and Jen, you don't have to go back, but it's the dynamic record choice, and I love dynamic record choices. And one of the reasons that my images and such were a little, I don't want to say wonky, but they could have been more elegant, was because I built this pre-dynamic record choice availability. And so I had to kind of stack up a single radio buttons to make it all work. Now with dynamic record choices, which I've used on other flows, you can pull over those images from your different tables and create your images with that dynamic record choice, and it's a true pick list. So anyway, just I highly recommend dynamic record choices if you're going down this route. But I still believe there are places for constants within your flow building. So, another thing about the static resources, all right, is that much like when I create a variable of any sort, I always set it to the input output type to input and output. Now, that may be lazy on my part. I'm not sure this is the best protocol, but it just seemed the most prudent when building my flows, because just as a quick overview, if it is private, it can be assigned only and used only within that flow. If it's an input, it can only be used using Visualforce controllers or subflow inputs. Or if it's an output, it can only be accessed from Visualforce controllers and other flows. So just to make it accessible across the board to me, especially when it comes to subflows, and we'll talk on those in a minute, that was what I felt was the most prudent to do. So, if you want to review the down and dirty about delivering Visualforce resources and want some good bedtime reading, there is a link on the screen with the verbiage there. I'll be happy to send that to anyone, and we'll post it. But I would also suggest anything you're going to do, bounce those decisions off of an evaluation of what's possible in Lightning and Lightning components, because some of this is resident right within the interface. So I'm sure Classic will be supported for years to come, but the cool new toys are being built in Lightning only. So if you want to be one of the cool kids, that's where you need to be. And they're getting real close to system parity as well. So that makes it much easier. Another thing that, while we're discussing Lightning, that is pertinent to our discussion of automation is macros are now available on any object that allows quick actions and customizable page layouts. So it's very exciting, because when you start leveraging all the power that we have between Process Builder, flows, quick actions, macros, all these different tools, in my opinion, you can really start building an enterprise level solution with no code at all. So anyway, just another very exciting piece that Lightning brings to the party. So, Jen, next slide. Okay, so once you create your static resource, you have to go in and into the record itself, and there's that view file link. So you click on the view file link. Okay, Jen. And now I only screenshotted the URL because that's really what's important. Essentially, what will happen is you'll have a black screen with the image surface there in the center. Okay. What you really need is from the forward slash before resource through the end of the name. You copy that. Okay. And then, Jen, next. When you create a constant, you would, much like creating a variable, you would click on that value, okay, within the bar, okay. It's going to give you this creation screen. You give it a name. I named mine all with pic on the end because that's what I was putting in, was pictures or images. It's a data type text, and then the nomenclature for the value is going to, you're going to open with a square bracket, image source, img space src equals, and then you will enclose it with a single bracket. You'll put your URL in, not a single bracket, a single quotation mark. You put your URL in, close with a single quotation mark, forward slash, square bracket. So that's how you code in your constants within your flows so that you can then access them and render them on screens. Even seasoned reps, okay, benefit from having these types of things built into their flows for them because it gives them that visual reference and gives them the confidence to create that quote or make that statement to the customer that, yes, this is what we're looking for. Okay, next screen. Now, a little crazy is okay, all right? So, again, this is the first flow I ever created, so be kind. I'm sure there's places we could make this more streamlined, more efficient, more elegant. Again, I mentioned I did it before the advent of the dynamic record choice, so those can be much more elegant. So anyway, but this is what that flow looks like in the background, and essentially that center section there. I mean, we'll drill into that what looks like a cross there in the center and here in a second, but that is essentially the path we took to get where we were going. Okay, so next screen, Jen. So the one thing that you want to do when you start building these things, especially big ones, if you want to tame the madness, subflows are our friends. If you notice there on the right-hand side, the little yellow with the red lines coming out of it, that denotes that it's a subflow or a flow in and of itself. Okay, so much like with trigger architecture, you sort of want one trigger to rule all the processes underneath it. That's the best way to build a flow because they become compartmentalized. It's easier to visually verify. It's easier to manage. Once it gets so large on your screen, it becomes unmanageable, very cumbersome. Then if you had to take that Mobius flow and it was actually lived within the flow itself and you wanted to reference it from somewhere else, you'd have to draw a line all the way across your flow. And that just, to me, is very visually unappealing. Whereas you could put that subflow in 2, 3, 4 different places, and it's nice, clean, and elegant. Okay, so it just, to me, that is just a cleanliness kind of thing. So I know we typically focus on process builder and flows during automation hour, but I wanted to touch on one thing to sort of flavor some flows we do in the background, which is approval processes. So we'll come back around to the flows behind it, okay? Then because this is the approval process is one thing. Go ahead, Jen, to the next slide, that we've leveraged to help automate our processes behind this whole quoting tool that we built. So now I'm not going to walk through building and managing an approval process. I'm sure you're all adept at that. But I am going to speak to how this functionality can help us keep our AEs from sort of going out of bounds and quoting outside of their parameters. So, and once completed, there's additional functionality baked into a process builder to help us maintain this integrity. So if you'll notice, in this instance, I want to speak to 3 fields: the record type, the status, which is approved, and the email alert, which is approval notice. So once it gets to final approvals, okay, then we change it from unapproved to approved, and I'll show you what that causes. We change the status to approved, just so it shows approved on all our reporting, and then we send the approval notice back to our sales rep. That way they're not having to manage, obviously, knowing where their quotes are in the process. Once it hits that status, we're good to go. All right, so next screen, real quick. All right, so this is the initial quote layout. As you can tell, there is no quote button there. It would live right beside submit for approval, and it's on your standard record type. So we just created a secondary record type, one being approved, one being unapproved, and we can toggle back and forth between them. All right. So next screen is what it looks like once it hits approval. And once again, all of you, I'm sure, are adept at toggling between record types, but I wanted to speak to why this toggling was important to us, not really in this arena, but further downstream. So, secondly, I want to talk about something else that to me has been a benefit is we use Conga for our quoting tool. And I'm not going to get into Conga, but I am going to talk about a sort of a field that I built in relation to my Conga instance, okay? My Conga app, whereby I can drive record types on an object by a formula field. So, Jen, next screen. So this is the formula, and it's essentially an if statement. I mean, it's got some ands and some nots and case and ors and different things built in there, but it's essentially an if statement. And it ticks through each of these qualifiers and grabs the right case ID or the right template ID and inserts that in just into the field. Okay. If it gets all the way to the bottom and it hasn't found anything, it defaults to the last one there on the list, just like an if statement, obviously an if statement. But what that gave me, and the reason we went this direction instead of using a process builder or a flow to make this happen, was because if I had 10 records out there and I needed to pivot on those 10 records and change the template, okay, I could change the process builder behind it. But if those records did not engage with that process builder or flow, then it would never update that value. It would never update their template. So for this, in this instance, I needed to make sure that these, if we changed a template, if we changed who we needed to direct these to, it would happen immediately. So it made more sense for us to take this formula and drive the automation from that side of the fence. So just to say, you can drive automation from both sides of the fence. Process Builder and Flow, they're my favorite things to slice white bread, but this is a great tool as well. Okay, next slide. So lastly, I want to talk through this quoting tool, or this quote process. And once again, this is only one of a couple of different flows that we have out there, or process builders. But there are certain things that if they happen in relation to a quote, we need to make sure that they are achieved. Okay. The first one is, to me, it was just such a big hole because let's say, and I know no sales rep would ever go out and get their quote approved at one discounting level and then change it with the approvals behind it just to get it submitted to their customer. I know that would never happen to anybody, but to me, it just seemed like a big gaping hole. So what we did was we built out these discounting. If the discount increases, and Jen, go to the next slide. Okay, so and before the message boards and Twitter and Facebook all light up, I see the record IDs that I've got coded in there. Okay, I'll address those in just a second. But the flow, it essentially says, is it approved? Is it already approved? Has the discount been changed? And more importantly, with the formula, it's essentially, is the discount greater than, and I love prior value. It's a great standard formula, but greater than the prior value of the discount. And because of the way we did quoting in the beginning, okay, and Jen, rightfully so, called me out on this, because of the way we did it in the beginning, if it was last modified by an account manager or the director or the account executive, which is the outside sales rep, then it would fall into this bucket. Those are the OR functions, or the OR lines down at the bottom there in the logic. As I got to reviewing this, once Jen brought that to my attention, I don't even need that anymore because our process has changed, so it never even reaches those. Those are sent by the wayside. It will either be picked up by this rule or the other rule, which I've got from my account management team. So it's always covered. So I can eliminate those as we move forward. Okay, Jen, next screen. So once it hits that, pretty standard stuff, it changes the record type. It just toggles back to unapproved. That way, anybody changes the discounting, it immediately runs that flow and or the it runs this node, this action, changes it back to unapproved, quote button goes away, and changes the status to pending review. So it has to loop back through the process. Okay, next screen. So a delete does not an edit make. Now this one came up and bit me, and I put this in for this very specific reason, because once I kept getting these quotes in where the product lines would add up to one thing and the dollar value at the bottom was always more. And part of it was predicated upon the way I had to architect everything to make it work within our business processes. But it would so my flow in the background only ran if products were added, because they were added or edited. That's an add or that's an edit. A delete is not an edit. A delete is a delete. So it never fired the rule. So it never took those dollar values out. So I had to build in this, which says if the quote line item is changed, and actually that's line item count. So I really thought I was going to build a flow to roll up to count. Okay, there's 3 now. I just took one out. Now it's 2. Now fire my flow. But I found on the quote object, there is a standard field called line items. It's just a counter. It's just a roll-up field that counts the number. So I was able to leverage a standard field to do that. So, and then I've also got travel and expenses in there, which is a separate process, but it actually works really well into what I want to follow up with. So next screen. All right. So it takes the quote ID. So what I'm doing here is calling this quote line item price roll-up flow. Give me the quote ID, give me the travel expenses value, and send those over. Okay, next screen. So very simple flow, and I think I may have spoke disparagingly about loops and fast lookups and all earlier. They're great tools. They're great tools, but there's tons of information about them on the internet. But here we do a fast lookup, we loop through our collection, we add up our values, and we set the value on the record. All right. So next screen. And I'm just going to walk through each of these each of these nodes real quick. So it looks up to the quote line item table, where the quote ID that we sent over, give me all the associated lines. And my nomenclature is SOCV quote lines, which that means it's a sales object collection variable. People use all kinds of different coding for those. That's just the way I do it. Okay, next screen. Now we loop through our lines one at a time till we're done with the loop. Loop through the collection, give me one line, and then down to the assignment. So next screen. So now we want to add up those values. So quote line items, and this to me is a little counterintuitive because the quote line items, the variable that we're adding to is on the left, and we're adding the value that we pulled over in our sales object variable collection, the total price rounding, into that variable. So to me, it was always difficult in reading that. But just remember, your variable is on your left, whereas your value that you're bringing in is on the right. Okay, next screen. And then we set the value. Once we roll all that up, we set the value. So we take our total price flow value, which is the field down there, okay, and we add, oh, wait, that's not the sales object variable or the variable we just put together. And I asked the same question when I was going through this. Why would I have done that? Because it's a different value. That is a formula. I put an F in front of, so it's formula quote value. So Jen, next screen. And when I looked at it, I'm like, oh, that's right. T&E, travel and expenses, is a separate line item. And so I have to insert it at a different spot in my quote. So just a quick if statement. I love writing formulas in these things. They're just so pretty. But if the value that we sent over is greater than 0, which means there is travel and expenses associated, then give me the quote line items variable that we just spun up plus the value we sent over into that field. If not, just give me the quote line items. So, okay, next screen. All right. And lastly, we'll go through this real quick because I'm running long on time. The last one on that list was product line removed. Okay. Once again, love prior value. If our line item count is greater than the prior value of line item count is greater than our line item count, then run this flow. And I got to looking at that. I'm like, didn't we just do that in the flow I was talking about? Go ahead, Jen. But then I realized, oh, wait a second. This is about our installed services quote checkbox. So what happens is when we do installed services, when one of those products, Process Builder looks at it and says, okay, that one's an installed service, it checks a box on my quote. That way, people have to have travel and expenses associated for those installed services. Okay, there's a stop in there that won't let them quote it if they don't have that. The problem is if they take it off, that box is still checked and they can't quote it. So, and you say, Joey, why don't you just have it flip the script when they take that line off? Well, if they've got more than one line, then you could run into an issue where it might not uncheck that box. So what I did was, just to make it clean and make sure there was no holes, was I sent it over to a new flow, which just aggregates all the lines. Since it does the same lookup, do I have any lines with do I have any lines with installed services on them? Yes, I do. Don't uncheck the box. If I don't, uncheck the box and roll forward, because one line at a time, Process Builder works fine. If you're talking about a set, then that's when you've got to leverage flow. So go ahead, Jen. So I know we've covered a ton of ground, gone in a lot of different directions. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I hope I gave you at least one thing that you can take and put in your toolbox. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Jen and see if we have any questions.
Great. So right now we have one question. So for those out there, type away, ask your questions now. There's a question from Bruce, and this was, I noticed on the confirmation screens and throughout, no back buttons in the flow. Would those have messed things up, or how does the quoting user revise something?
Well, in this one, I have essentially trained my users that if you make a wrong call, you just made a wrong call. Now, the better architecture would be, with those back buttons, I would want to build additional flows so that if there were any variables populated, I would want to clear those variables, because you could confuse the system if you get a variable in one place and you really mean to put in a different one. So I would just want to make sure that any variables were the variable that you chose. If you went back, grab that new variable, I would clear the variable when I went back and then insert the new one, just for safety's sake. And that was really the reason I built it. I really wanted to keep them on task. It was, once again, this was the first flow I built. This was the first flow for my sales team. I didn't feel overly confident that they would be real good at it. And it's, once again, it stood the test of time. It's still active in my org. It does what I need it to do. Okay. But at this point, as I mentioned, we're going to Lightning in 18. So why reinvent the wheel when I'm going to have to reinvent the wheel anyway 3 months from now? So I hope that answered your question, Bruce.
Great. So while we're waiting to see if there are any more questions, so Joey, when you went and learned how to do flow, what type of resources would you recommend people use to learn it?
In today's, see, this, when I did it, it was pre-Trailblazer, pre-Trailhead. And so I have a very good friend who is an electrical engineer, and his statement is he can Google hack anything. And so I leveraged Google heavily. There are some amazing blogs, and they're becoming more and more prevalent. YouTube has some great videos for building different pieces. People literally have code out there. I would highly, highly, highly recommend the Trailhead version, because that's going to give you exposure into more of the Lightning and how these are going to play in that space. So you can, once again, I mentioned earlier, sort of balancing your decisions against, if you're on Lightning, what's the best mode of attack? Because there are so many things under the hood with Lightning that will probably supersede some things I've already done. I'll probably be able to strip those out and use resident functionality just because of the Lightning interface.
Cool. Great. I don't see any other questions. Folks, you can also ask a general process automation question as well. It doesn't need to be tied to Joey's presentation. Just give another minute or so.
Sure.
I thought this was helpful. Like I didn't even know that you could call static resources from a constant. So that's a new thing that I took away.
Well, and that's why I tried to find something that was a little more obscure, something that maybe would be a takeaway for people, because again, you can use those, and I have used those with the dynamic record choice, with the dynamic choice, because you can take those same static resources and attach them to, let's say, the product table or the asset, the product table, and then call those product fields over and render them that way as well. So once again, there's more than one way to achieve this goal, but they can be leveraged from that direction as well.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions from folks on the phone. So I think we could wrap it up. But thank you, Joey, for coming on to Automation
thank you
Hour
for having
and presenting. And feel free to come back at any point.
Okay. Well, maybe when I spin this up in Lightning, then I'm sure it will be quite different. So maybe at that point.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much again, Joey, and thanks so much for folks on the phone for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.